Hey, New Testament readers, it is week 39. If I'm doing the math correctly, that means we are coming to the end of the third of the 4 quarters of the year, the 13-week quarters. So we're in the home stretch now. Okay, if this was a mile run, we would be coming around to begin the final lap, the bell lap. So let's hang in there. This week we're going to finish Galatians and begin Ephesians. Now, interestingly, these are 2 letters written, one at the beginning of Paul's missionary career, Galatians, the other at the end, Ephesians, one of his prison letters that he writes, we assume from imprisonment in Rome, though there are some who argue it could be in another place. Now, what's interesting about this is that even though, maybe a decade or more separates these 2 books, Paul is still writing very much about the same themes. It's the same issues that he is addressing in his ministry. Now, you remember that Galatians was written to show that Gentiles who believe in Jesus don't need to be circumcised and keep the kosher laws and the Sabbath laws in order to belong to God's people. Why? Because Jesus came fulfilling God's promise to bless the Gentiles as Gentiles, not making them Jews, but receiving them as they are. So Jews and Gentiles were reminded in Galatians, they both come to belong to God by the same means, by faith in Jesus. Just as Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. We're going to read that text here in Galatians, just as we saw it in Romans. Now, what I find especially interesting about Galatians is when you get to chapter 5, Paul starts applying what's going on here. Famously, he's going to talk about the fruit of the Spirit, the way the Holy Spirit is empowering people to live a godly life. But the emphasis he puts there is going to be on things that enable people to live together in love and harmony with people who are very unlike themselves. So, what does the Spirit empower? What's the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. All of this stuff that is what creates harmony among people. So think about that and think about what a tremendous gulf was being overcome with the gospel, but how the Spirit is empowering us to work on living that out so that, as we see in chapter 6, we can bear one another's burdens effectively, even as we are taking responsibility for ourselves and carrying our own burdens. Now, Ephesians, written late, may be written, and this is something we may talk about when we introduce Colossians in a couple of weeks, written to apply the material that Paul had written in Colossians to a broader audience. Ephesians is written to the church at Ephesus, but probably also to the larger region that Ephesus belonged to, what the Romans called Asia. It's the southwestern section of Asia Minor, modern Turkey. So this book is providing a perspective on the gospel that blows it completely out to the cosmic dimension, but then makes it very individual and personal. So at the cosmic dimension, we're seeing how this has been God's plan from before the beginning of creation, that it is through Christ and his death and his resurrection and through faith in him that God would make humanity his own, Jews and Gentiles. But then it's going to become very personal when we get to chapter 3, which will fall into next week's readings, where Paul will say, this is even happening in my own life as I'm a prisoner. God is working out this cosmic plan in the way that in my weakness, in my lowliness in this situation, the gospel is being made known, Christ is being glorified, God is furthering his program. And then as we'll get into later chapters, we'll see how he'll expand that out again. As you're reading chapters 1 and 2 this week, I want you to notice how Paul moves from chapter 1, that cosmic perspective, to chapter 2, where he says both we Jews and you Gentiles are awful sinners. But God has made us his through faith in Jesus. So this has nothing to do with ourselves. So nobody's in a position to say, I'm better than you. And then that leads to the discussion in the second half of chapter 2, where he says, so we're being built together. We Jews, we Gentiles, you Gentiles, we're all being built together into a building that is God's temple because his Spirit lives in us. And this is how God is glorified, as different kinds of people come together by the grace of God in love and in consideration for one another through faith in Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, glorifying the God who has planned this from the beginning. And this is the down payment, Paul says, the guarantee of the future salvation that we receive when Christ returns and the world is made new. All right, Ephesians, it's a great read. Galatians, it's a great read. The Bible, it's a great read. I'm glad we're reading it together. God be with you as you read this week.